Good afternoon. You're here with Mesa County Compass, and Lisa and I are sitting in her kitchen having coffee, as you can see, and we are trying to put together a video for you for our Compass broadcast of what took place yesterday for Constitution Day. We had an event going on at the library, we had an event going on at the old courthouse, and what we will present to you today are snippets of that particular event that took place. Our regular scheduled gentleman could not make it due to a surgery he had, and he hasn't quite recuperated yet, so that'll be on later on.
Yes, and where we started was at the library, and I have to say we had just such wonderful people working on it. Jason Baez, who is going to be running for a state representative seat, is acted as our patriot and greeter, and it was great. And City Councilman Ben Van Dyke came and spent quite a bit of time with us with the high school, our one high school student who got all of our attention. And then there was activity going on, such great preparation by Ketty, who is new on the library board, and her sister-in-law Katie, and then Barb Evanson, who's on our school board. And I just appreciated all the time that they spent with that. The library staff helped us in giving us a tour of 970 West, which you'll see a little bit of. But what I was really impressed with, I have to say, is John Shaver and Melinda Guthrie both taking time out of their day and just spending that whole 2 hours with us with one student. I think that John Shaver, city attorney, gave so much good information, and we give you quite a bit of that relates to the Constitution and how that applies to our city. And I think you should watch the whole thing, because I know I learned things. I had state and local government 100 years ago, and just everything was new. I've slept since then.
All things change.
Yes.
And I had quite an interesting experience at the courthouse. We didn't have very many people in attendance, which was a little bit disappointing. However, we did have some really good stuff. We did have a presentation, a proclamation from the county. J.J. Fletcher gave us the proclamation for the county, declaring the week of the 17th through the 26th, I believe, as Constitution Week. And then Scott Balfus of the City Council did the same for the city. It worked out very well there. And we had Barbershop Quartet, which was fun. They sang some Patriot songs, which was really terrific. When they can do it a cappella like they do, it's wonderful. And we then had Andrea Haitz, who is actually a District 51 school board president right at the moment, and she has done remarkable research into the Constitution and what it's all about, why it was written, those kind of things, and gave us a wonderful talk on that. You'll hear probably 90% of it. There was some of it we didn't get. And then we had Matthias Malumba, which we did not get any recording on, which I'm very sorry for. But you'll see a picture, because I have a picture and we'll put it up for that. He was there and gave us a very interesting talk as to why he considered even coming to the United States in the first place, and in the second place becoming a naturalized citizen, which was totally wonderful to hear from him.
So it was quite the day. Again, we didn't get the participation in all levels, but we understand people are busy. But our Constitution and our rights are so important, and understanding how they are exercised and what our rights and responsibilities are, I think, is so important. So again, we appreciate the time of everybody that participated. Ben Van Dyke, like I said, spent 2 hours with us, and I think as a city councilman, that is just wonderful. When you're out in the community, you're meeting people and you're hearing what their needs are.
Not just campaigning. I mean, he's actually participating, which is wonderful.
Yes. So that's about all I have to say about it. And we hope you enjoy the snippets that we have. And you've been watching Mesa County Compass. This is the facts as we see it and the truth as we know it. you decide.
All right, gentlemen, can you tell me what's going on here today?
Well, today is Constitution Day, so we are doing a homeschooling education all the way from pre-K to senior 12th grade.
It's a great event to get kids out, teach them a little bit about the Constitution, also get the homeschool kid community together and kind of let them broaden their community amongst themselves as well. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Absolutely. I'm Jason Bias.
Vin Van Dyke, City Council at Large.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have the First Amendment either, right? If you take that one out, so if you don't have a way to protect yourself against the government, then the government can start saying, well, you can't say this or you can't say that, right? And if they take away the things that we're allowed to say, then they have total power over us, right? So you kind of need the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, to back up the First Amendment. Does that make sense?
All right, so what brings you to the library today?
Constitution Day. I think the Constitution is incredibly important, and I want my kids to enjoy that with other kids.
Nice. And what do you think are some of the important factors of why you think your children need to know about the Constitution?
It's the foundation of our government and the framework and the intention that our founders put into creating the Constitution was just incredible. I mean, they read law books from Aristotle and Plato, and they put all of this together from the Bible, and they brought all of it together into this very unique piece that frames our country and gives us the opportunity to have the freedoms that we have, to speak, to carry a gun, to vote, all these beautiful things.
Nice. All right. So we're here at the Mesa County Library. You have any thoughts on ideas or things that they are doing here as Constitution Day that would reflect well on Constitution Day?
Yeah, I mean, I love how they are teaching the kids about our rights and our responsibilities as citizens of the United States, for sure. I appreciate the effort that they've put into it. So,
Do you have any ideas on what you would like to see done differently here that be more reflective of the Constitution?
I don't know necessarily about reflective of the Constitution, but I would love to see agendas stop being pushed on our children. Multiple times I've come to the library and there's been books that are front facing and like pushed in my children's face that they just go and pick up, and it's not material that I would want my children to read. As well as one time my kids were here with a babysitter and came home with a book that was like, I Wasn't Born Steve or something. I don't even remember the title of it, but it was very clear about gender transition, which is not something that we want our children knowing about or being pushed on them. And then there was a story time that we came to. We used to love coming to story time as a family. And we came to a story time, and the story time was about two moms building a tree house for their kid, and we have not been back since.
Right.
So just in summary, I think we can do better just being proud of the country that we're in and that we live in, and the history, the rich history that we have. I think as somebody who has moved here 11 years ago, I have had the privilege of learning our history, and that's something I want to teach to my children, and unfortunately those are not resources that are readily available at our library, and I would love to see that change. I would love my kids to grow up proud of being an American, and so I am so thankful that we had the opportunity to have today here at the library, and I hope to see a positive change.
Good question. You don't have to record in this room. That has, like, it's great for some things, like if you're wanting to narrate an audiobook or, yes.
Can other people hear?
You wanna try? Yeah.
Yell,
I'm not very
Caitlin.
loud.
Yell while you're in there.
We're going to do this with the research. Let me start just by frame of reference here in terms of the Constitution. And what I brought is a volume from the Colorado Revised Statutes. These are our books. This is the compiled laws of the state. And this is volume 1, and what it includes is the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Colorado, as well as all the various interpretations, laws, rules, and regulations that the state has adopted. What I'm showing you here, show it to the camera, is what is the United States Constitution. So those few pages actually are both the Constitution itself as well as the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And collectively, that's what is the United States Constitution. Contrast that to these number of pages here. That's the Colorado Constitution. And one of the primary differences between the two is the fact that our Constitution has a process for very liberal amendments, and it includes a number of amendments that are initiated or referred, and so rather than things being done legislatively, they're actually in the Constitution. There are pros and cons to that, both for us as practitioners, but also for the public, because there are lots of things that arguably could be done legislatively, but are really a function of now constitutional law. Without getting into any of the merits or any value judgments, things like trapping of bears. We've had that on the ballot recently. Wild animal hunting, things that are like, well, is that a law, or more properly done as a legislative enactment, or is it in the Constitution? Based upon how Colorado is, Colorado law and the Constitution is developed, most of that stuff is in the Constitution.
So John, you might talk to him about how do you determine when something is going to be put on the ballot as a constitutional issue versus a statute?
That's a great question, Lisa. What we have is really two processes. One is initiative, the other is referendum. An initiative is a petition process by how people will say, yep, we think there ought to be this particular law, whether or not it's part of the Constitution or in the city, and I'll talk about the city charter and the city process. And you may have seen people around election time out in front of various stores gathering signatures, petition circulators. Typically that's what they are doing, is they are gathering petitions to be able to initiate, to say, yep, there ought to be a law. And a vast majority of those things that I just showed you in the Colorado Constitution were initiated as opposed to referred. What referred means is that there has been a law that has been adopted, whether it's by the city council or the Colorado legislature, that then is either challenged and the voters say, hey, we don't like this thing, we want to put it to a ballot. That too has a process, but a referred measure is based upon something that has already been adopted, as opposed to an initiated measure, which is based upon something that hasn't actually been acted upon by either the General Assembly or the City Council. Let me talk just a little bit about the city. What I have here is the city charter, and this is the Constitution of the City of Grand Junction. The city was founded in 1881, and in 1909 it was recognized as a charter city, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means under the Colorado Constitution. The city started as a town company, which was really a private investment and an opportunity by a fellow named George Crawford to come here and develop a town, and it was a commercial enterprise. The town was successful, and because of its success, it needed to have a different governance structure, and so in the early 1900s, there was a charter commission that was created, which actually formed this charter, the substance of this charter, and has been in place with a few amendments since 1909. What this is for the city is that we are what's called a home rule municipality, which means under the Colorado Constitution, Article 20 of the Colorado Constitution, we have the City Council, Councilmember Van Dyke and his colleagues, have the same authority as the state does in certain areas of the law. And that is really important because of the idea that we are governed locally, and that the government of, by, and for the people can be determined at a local level. And that's a highly participatory process, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what that is and what that looks like, as well as the understanding that the state says, yep, we're going to recognize you and your authority, except in very limited circumstances. And how the state pulls back on the city's power is by declaring a matter to be a statewide concern, meaning that something that's going on throughout the state is so important that it have a consistent treatment that the legislature can say, well, no, you don't get to exercise your home rule power because we need to have it the same. whether it's in Grand Junction or Alamosa or Colorado Springs or wherever it may be. Grand Junction is one of 4 home rule cities that is actually named in the Colorado Constitution. Colorado adopted its first constitution in 1876 when the state was formed. And so the 4 that were recognized at that time were Grand Junction, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, and Denver. There are a lot of home rule municipalities since then, but we are one of the 4 original.
Okay, what's the difference between a home rule city and the way other cities are governed?
That's a great question, Lisa. And basically what it is that other cities, what are called statutory cities, the legislature tells them how they have to behave. So the folks that we elect that go to the House and the Senate in Denver not only create laws for the state organization, but they create laws for the statutory cities. We create our own laws, and we have the basis under the Constitution to adopt our code of ordinances, which are all of the local laws that we impose. There are still the overlay of the state law. One of the sort of classic examples of statewide concern has to deal with operation of motor vehicles. We want to have some standardization throughout the state, so if you're in Grand Junction, our laws are going to be the same as what is in any other city or any other place in Colorado.
Okay, so I want to ask you, what do you think is a better way to govern? Do you think it's better to have a home rule or a statutory rule, and why do you think that? From just what you've heard.
I think it's better to have a home, because then you know what everybody else thinks about that, and you can come to an agreement instead of one person telling you.
What do you think home rule gives the community members that's better than if they were just ruled by the state?
I think it gives the community members a choice, and gives community members a choice.
And I certainly would agree with you, and part of the beauty of having a home rule is that there is that choice, and oftentimes folks don't really understand that that's what the city council is and does, is it is our governing body in Grand Junction. And lots of times there's this sort of assumption, well, city council doesn't do much. Nothing could be further from the truth. They actually create the policy for how the city operates. They don't do the day-to-day work of the city. That is delegated to professional staff, but they set the policy, and one of the primary ways that policy is set is by the adoption of budget. How they choose to spend the city's money, how we collect taxes, what we collect taxes on, some of those kinds of things absolutely is within the province of the city, and that's where when you talk about local choice and local opportunity to participate, it's really important that folks understand that city council is essential to all of those things.
And what's the city manager's role versus the
Sure.
council's role?
City manager is the chief executive officer. If you think of the, excuse me, if you think of the city as a almost $400 million corporation, he is the guy that is the CEO. And so day to day, he does the business of the city as directed by the policy articulation of the council. The city manager form of government actually comes as a development from the reform era movement of the 20s, because there used to be a lot of corruption in government when there were elected officials who were frankly making decisions that might be in their self-interest, or there might be some other thing that being involved with government allowed them to do. And the city management role, what we call a council manager form of government, actually professionalized that and took out the specific interest and the opportunities for corruption that frequently occurred in elected official models prior to that particular advent. Certainly some communities continue to have council members that are engaged in the operational aspects of that, but the opportunities for self-service, self-dealing, and corruption are much higher when you don't have that professional management of the city that is brought with council manager form of government.
Okay, back to asking you, so looking at that, can you see any downside to having a city manager that is removed from the population? As citizens, we don't have a say over the city manager. advantages to having that?
I could see that it puts a lot of power in the manager's place, and that could be used for really bad things.
And it does, and I might disagree with Lisa just a little bit, because there is a way for the citizens to engage in how the manager performs, and that's through the elected officials, because there is always that feedback loop of, we are here to serve the people of the community, and the way that service is defined is by the policy articulation that the council gives, and whether or not the manager and the professional staff, me included and others, is really achieving, is delivering on those policy expectations. So there's a feedback loop. Admittedly, it is not a direct feedback loop, but there's always a feedback loop.
So we participate in what he does by hiring people by voting for them on the city council, who will vote, then hire the city manager. So that's how we use our voice. Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect explanation. And there are 3 people that are city council employees. There's the city manager, the city attorney, and the municipal judge. And so we have direct accountability to the council.
So what's one constitutional issue? The other thing that, this is another question for you. So if there is a conflict between a state law and a local law, who is going to win that?
You mean a law that is not, well, that comes into play with the ones that he talks about, where there are some things that are statewide.
Right.
But you're talking about something is not statewide, but we have one that's in conflict with state legislation. How does that come out?
I think the state law would win because it's governing over a larger area, and there's a lot more people voting for one law.
And that may be so, but I'm going to give you a lawyer-like answer and say it will depend. And it will depend in large measure on whether the state has preempted, and also whether or not there's other body of law that would say, no, this one is preferred because of some constitutional interpretation. Because our duty, whether it starts with me or the council members, is we all swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Colorado, the Charter and ordinances of the City of Grand Junction. It typically would flow in that priority as well. So we're first going to look at what the pronouncements are, the decisions are from the United States Supreme Court. Then we're going to look to the Colorado Supreme Court. Then we're going to look to what we may do locally. Lisa asked for some examples of what we deal with on a constitutional basis, and I can tell you we deal with it on almost a daily basis when we present ordinances to the City Council. Ordinances are our form of a law, on a recommendation that they adopt a certain policy or direction. We always look at whether or not it satisfies certain basic constitutional principles. And those principles are typically derived from the United States Constitution and the United States Supreme Court, because they've been dealing with this for so long. You know, they've been dealing with it for close to 250 years. Colorado has been 150 years. And so there are certain basic principles that we look at. We look at whether or not it is vague, whether or not it is otherwise preempted, whether or not it is enforceable, what the standards are, whether or not there is due process. From a city council perspective, due process is a very important thing, because we have an obligation to treat people fairly. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to like a decision that we may make, but we have the obligation to make sure that folks have an opportunity for notice. We tell them what we do, that they have an opportunity to be heard. We set hearings and give them places that they can come talk to the council. And then lastly, we want to make sure that any laws that we adopt are not improper in terms of discrimination or other kinds of things where there might be selective application or preference in the law. So those things we deal with on a daily basis. Some of the higher profile ones, Lisa mentioned one, and that is panhandling. And recently we've had a lot of questions about camping and homeless and what to do about those people, and that implicates the Constitution in lots of different ways. Most recently, the analysis has been about the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, which prevents cruel and unusual punishment, and the idea that people that may not have a place to be, if they're in a park or a public place, is it cruel and unusual to say, yeah, you can't be here and we're going to give you a ticket and throw you in jail? There's a mixed bag on that. What the Supreme Court has recently said in the Grants Pass decision is that communities may enforce those regulations. What Grand Junction has done is we have taken a very measured approach to say, yes, we know we have a problem. However, if folks aren't really creating a problem, their behavior isn't creating a problem, then we're going to be more likely to not charge them criminally, deprive them of their liberty by saying you got to go to jail. One of the other things from a constitutional perspective relative to homeless is the idea of imposing fines on people that may have no money, and that's mostly based upon Colorado law of saying that if we say you violated the law and we're going to fine you, but they haven't ability to pay, then what do we do? And is that somehow an inappropriate punishment by virtue of their economic condition? So, short answer is we deal with it daily.
So do you have any questions on that? Because soon we're going to give you a constitutional question, and I'm hoping everybody will kind of help you maybe with some research. And we're going to have Andrea come in and yay! And she's going to show us how we know what research is good research. But one last question for you, John. When you are looking for precedents, do you use Westlaw? I mean, is there a quick and down and dirty program that you can use to say, here are the precedents regarding
I'm anticipating your question, Lisa, because as you asked the question, what I did is I opened the Colorado Constitution to what we call our annotations. And every section of the Constitution has a specific provision that relates to certain case law. And I just happened to open this to part of the Ethics in Government section. It's Amendment 41 of the Colorado Constitution. And I'll just show you here. Each one of these relates to a particular section or sentence in the substantive part of this. This is the actual amendment to the Constitution. This is Amendment 41, and it has to deal with ethics in government. And each of these sentences or paragraphs has what we call an annotation. And so this particular annotation talks about what is in the first section of that. And this describes what is in this case. So this case is called Pathways v. Ritter, and that is actually a case. And so to answer your question, that's where I start, is I will always start with the annotations, because if there's an annotation and there's a case, then you go and read the case, because that is original source material, because that is what the court has told us based upon the facts that are alleged in this case of how to interpret that
Do you
particular
understand
provision.
what annotation means? It's an interpretation or an explanation of what the amendment says?
Exactly. And it's specifically in the book referred to as an annotation, and the annotation is the reference to the case. In answer to your question, Lisa, we also do use electronic research, but this is really sort of the initial place to look. The other place, based upon lots of years of doing this, is knowing that there are certain precedential decisions and saying, okay, this is a particular issue that arises as a due process matter, and there are very standard kind of due process analyses, but they are all typically based, and for research purposes, based upon reported decisions of the various courts.
So you don't just look at the amendment and the information there, but you talked about precedential decisions.
Absolutely.
What's the difference between a court decision that isn't precedential and one that is? So that he understands why we use that.
Absolutely. And that is not susceptible to a perfectly clear explanation.
Yeah.
So let me explain it, and then we'll circle back. But the bottom line is that if it is a reported decision by a court that has jurisdiction, then it is presumed to be precedential. Courts don't always report their decisions for purposes of publication, and so if it's not a published decision, then it is of limited precedential value, but we may still cite it anyway if there is a principle that we say, hey, the Court of Appeals already talked about this, and even though it's not a published decision, we think the Court of Appeals did the right thing in suggesting, and we will argue that. Generally, thank you for the question, generally what the law is based on is a doctrine called stare decisis, and that's Latin, that means the thing adjudicated. So if in fact there is a factual predicate that is the question that has come before, we will look to that, and the idea in the law will be, hey, this court already talked about this, has already decided it, so they ought to do it this way. Or if you're on the other side, hey, they did it this way, but they did it wrong. And so we will then argue about whether or not the court has properly interpreted the Constitution. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Answer your question?
Yeah, because you were talking about big words there, presidential decision. I said, does he know what a decision is?
Sorry,
You know
there's a
what
little bit of
precedent is?
jargon, but if you say
Yeah.
stop, I will stop, and we'll take it
Yeah.
apart. So.
And now we're gonna have Andrea talk about the researching for the case that we're gonna give you. Because oftentimes when laws are passed, then there is a question that people raise and say, I don't know if that law is constitutional or not. But most of the time, it's a conflict between two different amendments. So she's gonna show you where you could find information to make a reasoned judgment.
Well, some information, yeah. Like, I will admit, I am not a legal expert by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm probably learning about these resources.
But you can use
But I
these.
can talk about broad terms and things you can pick out of research. So if anyone is interested, I'm gonna pass around
Back to you here.
this little worksheet that we're running on. This is actually, was originally designed for college level students, but I think it can work honestly for high school, and I've even done it with middle schoolers before. Let's see, and did I get you one yet? Yeah. Let's see, there's one for you.
You have an extra?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a freshman. I'm a freshman.
So this is not my original work. I will admit there's a little annotation down there and stuff. I'm sorry. I'm just going to turn on the power.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're just fine.
C-R-A-A-P, okay.
I just find slides helpful because otherwise I get lost, and if I get lost, then I really can't communicate information effectively. But, so, Tarek, since you were only a teen today, I guess I kind of pick on you a little bit and ask, what is your level of experience with research? Just because I was homeschooled myself, so I know the beauties of having a very individualized education is that means everybody's often at different points in their educational journey. So I'm like, have you done research before? Done research papers, anything formal like that?
Yeah, I've done a few of them.
Okay, awesome, cool. So yeah, in that case, I'm probably not going to go through the research presentation part of things, but I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluating sources. And of course, please just keep in mind this is very, very generalized because unfortunately, with the advent of ever new technologies and ever new ways of spreading this information, I can't give you like surefire, like this website will always have accurate information. These people are the people you can trust. I can't make that judgment. It's like who I trust on local news is probably going to be very different than who I trust on being a lawyer, for instance. So, like those two people have very different expertise. So.
If it makes you feel better, when we were in school, we weren't allowed to use the internet as a source.
Yes.
You
had
to wind it up.
I even have
We
slides
didn't
about
have
how
it.
you can use Wikipedia effectively to do research as a potential source. I'm not saying people
If you
should
need
cite
to use
Wikipedia, to be
words.
perfectly clear. I'm just saying it can actually be a really good resource to get started. But
blurred or bruised or broken, and that may so act, we must study and understand the points of danger. So what he's really saying here is that we really are framing, the Constitution frames the Declaration. So you have the frame around, the Constitution frames the Declaration. And so both are equally important. If you think about, well, I mean, look at this building, and if you go back towards Washington, or if you go to the great museums, the frames around some of those pictures are equally as beautiful as the picture it encapsulates. When we went to Europe several years ago, and we went to the Louvre in Paris, the frame that sometimes was around the piece of art was as equally magnificent as the art piece itself. And so that's what Lincoln is really explaining here, is that the Constitution around the Declaration of Independence, both are so equally important, and the Constitution frames the Declaration of Independence, and they dovetail so nicely together. And that's basically what our founding fathers did, right? They wrote the Declaration of Independence, and then a few years later, after the Continental Congress, they came together after much debate, right? You had the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, and maybe I should say vociferous debate. They came together, and then they created the Constitution. So the Declaration is the moral core, the apple of gold, and the Constitution is the structure, the picture of silver that created to protect and display that core. So without the Constitution, the Declaration would be just words, and without the Declaration, the Constitution would be just the empty legal framework. So they both really have to go hand in hand. So those two things kind of bring it together. So in going back then to bringing the Declaration together, it starts out to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This key principle of human equity, this was a radical idea in 1776. There were no divine rights of kings, there was no permanent ruling class. There was the divine rights of kings, and so this was a different idea. They were really changing this idea of the people having this consent, right? And so really changing the idea that the people would have a say. And so again, this was tyranny in the eyes of the king and the English government. So rights are not given by the government because the government can take them away. And I would have to say that this is actually quite concerning. I don't know if you guys have watched the news even as of late. Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia just said recently that he was concerned by some comments that were given by someone that he actually said that rights were given by the government, and that they were not given by anybody else. And so that is actually quite contrary to what our founding fathers stated actually in the Declaration of Independence. And so if rights are given by the government, they can equally be taken by the government. And so our rights are given by nature and nature's God, because then they can't be taken away by anyone or the government. So unalienable rights, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, are natural rights. They're natural rights because they're ones we're all born with. No one can give them, and no one can take them away. They're ones that are all given to us because we are humans, because we're equal. Government's job is to secure those rights, to protect those rights, not hand them out. The consent of the governed. To secure these rights, governments are intended among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now this is quite different than any other government. The consent is rooted in equality. No one has an inherent right to rule over another unless it is given by the people. And in order to have a country as big as ours, you have to have the consent of the governed. It would be not fair for California, again, to have proximity to Washington, D.C., if we did not have the consent of the governed, because Virginia would be so much closer to Washington, D.C. than California if we did not have a representative government and a consent of the governed. And so the only way that this representative government with the consent works is because of the way that we have our form of government set up. And so that is why our country, as big as it is, works the way it has for as long as it has. So going on to representation, the consent requires representation. People must have a voice in government. Representation allows peaceful transfer of power instead of conflict. Actually, Abraham Lincoln talks about bullets instead of, the transfer of power from being peaceful instead of bullets, because again, when kings used to transfer power, a lot of times you could read in the past history that a lot of times that came with a lot of bloodshed, because they're used to overthrow really power by whoever had basically mob rule. Representation requires a written framework. The consent requires representation, and representation requires a written way for that to happen. And this is truly the only way for a large country to operate, like I said. The Constitution is our rule book. It limits government, divides power, and guarantees this. So why is the Constitution so unique? It's no other countries may have tried to replicate it. I think if they replicate it, they sometimes tend to try to deviate from it, and then it doesn't quite actually work the way that it has for almost 250 years here in the United States. It's 4,500 words. It's easy to read in under an hour. And of course, I guess if you could read cursive, if you want to read the original document. And I'm glad to know that we're teaching our kids still to read cursive these days. It's short, it's clear, it's flexible. It's built in an amendment process. It lets it adapt without losing its core principles. And its power flows from the people. It begins with we, the people. We create the government, not the other way around. I know it seems a little bit these days that we're kind of on the precipice of that changing, and we definitely need to be vigilant that it is we, the people, who are holding that to account. It is limited government, and I think we need to, as people, need to keep holding that into account. We need to be holding the powers accountable. The federal government doesn't have all the power, nor should it. And we have global influence. It's inspired many constitutions worldwide, but none have lasted as long or has worked as well as ours. So in kind of wrapping a little bit of this up in modern application, just as I read from the First Amendment, free speech, consent, and obviously fear from retribution. Obviously, the events of this last week it is disheartening to be afraid, or to think to be afraid that you can not express your opinion on politics, ideologies, religion, honestly without fear of violence, but now without fear of actually losing your life. Obviously last week that was a political assassination. And our founding fathers, this was written 250 years ago. And obviously even since then we've seen political assassinations. Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, obviously were some of the more notable ones, Martin Luther King Jr. For brave men who were standing in the gap to really stand up for people and ideologies that they believed dearly in, that obviously other people didn't believe or agree with. These are tragedies. And obviously, the one last week has sparked nationwide conversation about free speech, safety, and political violence. Why do these things matter? The founders believed citizens must be able to speak and debate and disagree without fear of retaliation, violence, or death. And unfortunately, I don't know that we'll ever live in a world where we're ever going to be free from that. When political violence silences voices, the consent of the governed becomes meaningless. Unfortunately, social media reactions and government crackdowns raise difficult questions about how we protect speech while condemning violence. And I'm a free speech absolutist. I don't think there's hate speech unless it incites violence. I think people out there who have said horrible things have the right to say them, unless it's inciting violence. I think it's disgusting, but they have the right to say it. I mean, it doesn't mean you're not free from the consequence of saying it, and if you choose to share it on a social platform, then you have the consequence that comes with it. I don't think the government should get too involved in some of those things, but free speech is free speech. I want those people to be able to have the right to say what they're going to say because I want to have the right to say what I want to say. But it is really sad that we can't be able to sit down and actually have some conversations. If we allow fear or retaliation to silence our voices, we lose the very freedoms of what the Constitution protects. Civil disagreement is healthy, and political assassination is a sign of collapse. We must recommit to civil dialogue and defend the rights of even those we disagree with. And I will. I don't actually even agree. We had someone actually at our school board meeting last night asking us as a school board to go find people working within the school district to find them and actually terminate their employment if they've actually said things that were maybe not necessarily appealing. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that unless it was maybe said in a classroom or maybe in an inappropriate stance or calling for violence. If it was in a context of an employment situation, that would be a different discussion. But again, if it's on their own time, they have the right to their free speech. Again, not free from the consequence, but I think we have to be really careful in how we thread this needle. We do need to commit to the dialogue. I think we need to come back to the table and talk about why are people feeling that way. Like, let's take the temperature down and talk about these things. Why are they so hateful? Why are they saying those things? But people celebrating murder, we do need to talk about bringing that down. That is not okay. So let's close this on a good note here, though. So our Constitution is only as strong as the people who live under it. So again, the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble.